Okay, so I'm going to start with that. And then this way, by the time I think the other guys will be on already by then. Okay? Sponsor is A Year of Learning, Del Bodlander, in memory of his wife, Adele Bodlander, Bas Yehuda Tzvi. Dr. Paul Konigsberg, in memory of his brother, Dr. Sam Konigsberg. Shimon Reuven ben Levish. Ed Goldberg's cousin, Nisan Hara, Nisan ben Fardosa. Paula and Bob Bromberg, in memory of their dear friend Julian Smith. Yehuda ben Yisrael. Malka Mann, in memory of her family murdered in the Holocaust. Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bas Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. The many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi, friends of Toby Paris, Sarah Tova Bas Yisrael. Month of Learning, sponsored by Gary and Marcia Schrager, in memory of his father, David ben Yosef, and his mother, Freda Bas Hendel. Dov Bodlander, a month of learning in memory of his father, Tzvi ben Yaakov Yitzchak, his mother, Bela Devasha Bas Harav Dov Ber, and his father-in-law, Yehuda Tzvi ben David Nachum, and his mother-in-law, Alta Chaya Bas Harav Avraham Yosef. A week of learning sponsored by Michael and Judith Poretsky in memory of his father Gershon ben Chaim Tzvi, by Vicky and Rubinovich Fish and Larry Fish in memory of her mother Etta Bat Tzvi, her father Chaim ben Shlomo and his father Avram ben Shlomo, a family of Malka Levi in memory of her husband Avram Chaim ben Zalman Leib. A day of learning, well, that's not for a while yet. Okay, and that's also not for a while yet, so we're done. Okay, all right, we're going to start. I'd like us to start, if that's okay with everybody, on Yud Gimel Amud Beis at the bottom of the Amud with the Mishnah. Okay, I figured hopefully everybody got through Yud Gimel all right, especially the Agadata piece on Rabbi Meir. Okay, and now we can start with, right, as well as the discussion, okay, of Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel. Okay, if everybody else can be muted, it would, I think, make it a little easier too. Okay, so as I said, we're going to start on the bottom of Yud Gimel Amud Beis, about 5 lines from the bottom. Okay, now remember we have described certain aspects of the Korah and the Lechi. We come back in this Mishnah to discuss how thick a beam does the Korah have to be? How strong does it have to be? In other words, I've given you the example of a 2x4. Is that, would that be sufficient? Or do we need something larger? Okay. And so our Mishnah is going to pick up on this topic and continue into Yud Daled today as well, okay? Which is today's daf, of course. Matnitin, our Mishnah teaches, Hakoreh Sha'amru, this crossbeam that we've been talking about, let's say, Rechava Kadei Lekabel Ariach. It has to be wide enough so that it can have a small brick put on it. Va'ariach, and what is an ariach? Chatzi levana shel shlosha tfachim. It's half a large brick that measures 3 by 3 tfachim. Okay. Daya lekoreh shetehei rechavat tefach. On the other hand, the Mishnah is now saying to us, it seems sufficient then for the Korah to be a tefach wide, kadei lekabel ariach lerachvo, in order to sustain this half brick or small brick for its width.
Rabbi Green, when they give us a brick 3 by 3, they're only giving 2 dimensions. They're not giving 3 dimensions.
Correct. Okay. So think of it as follows. Think of your floor in your apartment. Okay. You have a stone floor, a slab, right? I'm assuming, I haven't been in your apartment, but I'm assuming like most people here. Okay. So that's a certain width and a certain length. Okay. It's not discussing the thickness. You're right, Bob. Okay. So that's what they're saying. Half of something like that. Okay. So the Gemara comes back with Havak Dabel Arich. Okay. So now we get Ubriya. And how sturdy is it? This Korah, Kadei Lekabel Arich. It's got to be sturdy enough to be able to retain this half brick. Okay, this small brick. Right? So think, for example, that we're not talking necessarily about a simple plank of wood, let's say, okay, but something stronger, thicker. All right. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Rechava. Rabbi Yehuda therefore says the Korah is valid if it's sufficiently wide enough, even though it may not be strong enough to support the half brick, the small brick. Af al pi she'ein b'riya, even though it's not sturdy enough. Okay. Haitash shel kash. Okay, so the Gemara now says, well, let's say the Korah was made of reed, straw, the shalkinim, or it was made of poles or reeds. Ro'ino to ke'ilu hu shamatechet. We would consider it as if it is made from metal. Akuma. Let's say there is a bend in that Korah. Okay? The bend, remember now, is thought to be stretching out into the Rishus Harabim. Okay? We don't have a diagram here, unfortunately. Koren Art Scroll, Koren Steinsaltz has a number of diagrams. Okay. However, so think of it that way, right? Ro'ino to ke'ilo hi pshuta. We would see it as if it is smooth, flat, right? Agula. Let's say that the Korah is rounded. Ro'ino to ke'ilo hi mirubat. We see it as if it is square. Kol sheyesh behekefo shloshat tfachim. So long as it has a circumference, okay, of 3 tfachim, says our Mishnah, yesh bo rochav tefach. That will tell us that it must have at least a width of a tefach, and that would make it acceptable. It would seem. Let's go on now to Yud Daled Amud Aleph. Okay, our Gemara. Tefach, asks the Gemara. Is a tefach really sufficient? Tefach umechza bai. It should be slightly more than a handbreadth, a tefach and a half. Kevan d'rachav lekabel tefach, since it has to be sufficient, okay, to maintain at least a tefach. Idich chatzi tefach, okay, mivin le patina, okay. So if that's the case, says the Gemara, once the Korah is wide enough, right, to accept, then it could have a little bit on one side and a little bit more than the other, right? And that the situation is, if you need to, okay, you can put some cement, some other clay there. Mashu mehagisa umashu mehagisa. A little bit on this side and a little bit on the other side. The kaima, and then it can remain in its position. So that's how you know that the Korah is adequate. In other words, it would be a measure, right? Amar Rava bar Rav Huna, says Rava bar Rav Huna, Koresha Amru. Now we're giving another statement, okay? A different explanation. This Korah that we're talking about, right? Tzricha shetehe b'ri'ah kedei lekabel ariyah. It has to be, according to Rava bar Rav Huna, still has to be sturdy enough to support this half brick, this right, small brick. Uma'amidea, Korah. And what about the side posts? Okay, the walls that the Korah is put on. Einam tzrichin shehiyu bri'im kedei lekabel Korah v'ariyah. That the side posts, in other words, the walls of the mabui, don't necessarily have to be strong enough to support the cross beam and the brick. Okay? So in other words, it could just be, we'll see in a moment what it could just be. Okay. V'rav chista, amar, echad ze ve'echad ze, tzrichin sheyu bri'im kedei lekabel Korah v'ariyah. But Rav Chista argues instead that what we must be, that the supports, okay, for the Korah have to be strong enough to hold both the Korah and the half brick, okay? And the note in Art Scroll, note number 4, just to point out, is that we're talking about a situation where we're not putting the Korah exactly on the top of the walls of the mabui, okay? But we have pegs, let's say, sticking out of the walls, like we've discussed previously. And then the Korah is resting on those pegs, okay? Right? So if you look on 14A1 in the diagram that we are given, okay, think of two pegs sticking out from the top of the two sides there of the entrance to the Korah. Okay. Now, another point. Someone else. Amar Rav Sheshet. Says Rav Sheshet, Hinich Korah al gabe mabui. Right. One has put the Korah, okay, on top of the entranceway of the alleyway. Uparas aleh machzelet. Okay, and we spread over it a mat. V'hagbia min hakarka shlosha. And the amount of distance from the ground to the bottom of the mat is going to be a 3 tfachim. Okay, right? So that is the question. Is this really going to be adequate? Korah ein kan, mechitza ein kan. So his argument is you therefore don't really see the Korah, so therefore it doesn't adequately act as a heker, and as a mechitza, it's also not sufficient. Korah ein kan, daha michse. It's not an adequate cover, heker, right? Because it's covered, okay, and it can't serve then as the heker. Mechitza ein kan, it's not adequate as a partition. Why? Because dahava le mechitza shahagidim bo'im ba. Because if it's only three tfachim in distance to the bottom of the ground, it still means that the small animals, particularly goats in the case, is the implication, can pass through it. And we never say that that's a strong enough partition. Okay? So, given that example, we go on to a new Braita. The new Braita is going to discuss again clarification of the status of the Korah. Tanu Rabbanan, says the new Braita. Korah hayotz e mikotel zeh, ve'eno nagaat b'kotel zeh. Right? So the Gemara wants to say we have a Korah, a crossbeam, that comes across one side from one wall, but it doesn't touch the opposite wall. Okay? And the don't really have a clear diagram, unfortunately, in Art Scroll. Okay, for this example. Okay, but what happens? Says the Gemara as follows: Mikotel zeh ve'eino nagat b'kotel zeh v'chein shnei korot. Or let's say you have two cross beams. Echad yotze mikotel zeh ve'echad yotze mikotel zeh. Okay, ve'einam nogod zo b'zo. And you have two cross beams, one coming out from one wall, one coming out from the other wall, but they don't meet. Okay? And again, Art Scroll does not have, Koren Steinsaltz has, by the way, diagrams of all of these. Okay? Pachot mishlosha, if the amount of space between what I'll call the first example of the crossbeam not reaching to the top of the other side of the mabui, but it's less than 3 tfachim, or the space between the two coming out, ein sarich lahavi korah acheret, then we don't have to bring another crossbeam. Shlosha sarich lahavi korah acheret. If it's 3 tfachim, if it's less than 3, no problem. If it's 3, we have to bring another crossbeam. Okay. Now that is, we said, the Braita. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer pachot mi arba. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel holds levud is based on 4 tfachim, not on 3, and so therefore he argues if it's less than 4 tfachim, ein tzarich lahavi korah acheret. Then we have no reason to have to bring another crossbeam, right?
Rabbi, did they explain, or the pictures that you have show what holds it up if it's only supported at one end?
Well, it could very well, the picture doesn't show what it shows. It's on one end on the wall, and the other, it doesn't reach the other end.
It should fall down.
Theoretically, you're right. Okay. Right. So what happens?
We had a contractor like that in our place. Yeah.
Oh goodness. Okay. Ein tzarich lahavi korah acheret. Arba, says Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, if it's 4, tzarich lahavi korah acheret. One must bring another one. V'chein shnei korot, and likewise 2 crossbeams, hamatimot, right, that are matching. In other words, that are very narrow. Lo bezo kadei lekabel ariach. If one isn't enough to support this half brick, v'lo bezo kadei lekabel ariach, and the other one isn't wide enough to have the width to support this half brick. Im makbelot ariach l'rachvo tefach ein tzarich lahavi korah acheret. Okay, if you put them so they're parallel, and you can put the brick on the 2 of them, okay, then you wouldn't have to bring another korah. Ve'im lav tzrich lahavi korah acheret, and if not, one has to bring another korah. Okay, we continue now with Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel telling us, Im makabelet ariach la'archo shlosha ein tzarich lahavi korah acheret. Okay, Rabbi Shimon, okay, is arguing here that if one has to bring, okay, that if it's less than a tefach, this, what we'll call this double or parallel, I think it's better, help us, that it holds the half brick, okay? If it's less than 3 tfachim, Okay? In that case, he'll say, it's okay, it's all right. All right? But if it's not, all right, ein tzarich lavi korah acheret. Ve'im lav, and if not, tzarich lavi korah acheret. Then one has to bring another new korah. And that would be more like the diagram opposite note 12 on 14A2. Okay? That you have two parallel, that neither of them is wide enough, okay? But you are able to support the brick on it. V'imlat, right? Okay. So now let's continue. V'imlat tzrich lavi koracher. Hayu echat lemala ve'echat lemata. Okay. So here now, in this case, we see the diagram, the picture opposite notes 13 and 14 in the art scroll notes. Okay, one is above and one is below. Okay, Rabbi Yossi b'Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ro'ina te'alyona ki'ilu hi lamata, ve'eta tachtona ki'ilu hi lamala. Okay, that in this situation, we'll see as if they are parallel, whether we lower the upper one or raise the lower one, right? Ubilvad shelo tehe elyona lamala mi esrim amma. So long as the upper one is not higher than 20 amos. V'tachtona lamata me asara. And the lower one less than 10. Okay? 20 tfachim and less than 10 tfachim. I'm sorry. Okay. Now, so that's the case. Now Abaye, Amar Abaye, Rabbi Yossi b'Rabbi Yehuda Savarla, Ke'avuha, Bechada, Upaligale Bechada. Abaye is explaining that it must be that Rabbi Yossi b'Rabbi Yehuda agrees with his father in one case, but disagrees with his father in another case. Okay? Upaligale Bechada. So what is it? Savarla ke'avuha bechada. He agrees with his father in the one case. De'it le ro'in. That in this case we have what we might call, so to speak, see. Okay? What does it mean we see? Okay? We view a situation. We might appear that what might appear as an inadequate korah as adequate, okay? Where so long as there is the width to hold up this half brick, okay? So that would be our example of the two parallel ones, right? Upaligale bechada, and he disagrees with him in another case. The ilu Rabbi Yehuda savar lamala me esrim, that Rabbi Yehuda holds that if it's above 20 tfachim, the Rabbi Yossi b'Rabbi Yehuda savar b'toch esrim, and Rabbi Yossi says that it has to be within 20 tfachim. Yes, and lamala mi esrim lo, but if it's more than 20 tfachim, no. The korah is not viable. Okay, let's go on. Back to our Mishnah. Right? Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rechava afal pi she'ena bria. Rabbi Yehuda said, so long as it has adequate width, but it doesn't have to be sturdy. Matne la Rav Yehuda, Lechia ba Rav Kami de Rav. Rav Yehuda was teaching this text, okay, to Chia, the son of Rav, in front of Rav. Rechava, afal pi she'ena bria, that it's based on its width and has nothing to do with how sturdy it is. Amarle, and instead, what happens? Rav says to him, Atniya rechava ubria. Teach it that it has to have both width and sturdy enough. V'ha'amar Rabbi Eli, But didn't Rabbi Eli, Amar Rav, say in the name of Rav, Rechava Arba'a, Afal Pi She'ena Bria, that the width has to be enough to be 4 tfachim, even though it doesn't have to be that sturdy. Okay, Rechava Arba'a Shani. Okay, in that case, he's saying if it's the width, okay, of the brick is 4 tfachim, that is a different situation. Okay, back to our Mishnah. Haita shel kash. We said the situation was if it was straw or reeds or something else like that, right? Okay, we view it as if it was made of metal. Okay. Mai kamash malan, what is it coming to teach us? The amrin and ro'im, that we say we view it. In other words, we consider it as if, that while it may have been, again, may have not been perceived as an adequate korah, we consider it as if it's sufficient. Hainu hach. Okay, isn't that the same? Mahu detema. What are we going to be what do you want to tell us then? Okay. B'mina amrina. We're talking about a situation, okay, that you are saying that this korah has to be made from the same type of material that is capable of supporting this half brick. That's what we're saying. Okay, so if it should be made of wood, okay, then that's usually strong enough, right? Amrina. Shalo b'mina, lo amrina. We would say that if it's not from the same kind of material, we don't say that. Kamash malan comes to teach us, however, that that's not the case. That even when the korah itself is not strong enough to support this half brick, okay, we still go by the width and not by the sturdiness, and therefore that korah would be sufficient. Okay. Another example from our Mishnah. Okay, akuma ro'ino taki ilohi pshuta. If it's curved, okay, we say if it's bent, okay, and maybe because it's bent, all right, at the bend, it may not be able to be have a width to for these half brick. What about them? We consider it as if it's straight. Pshita, Abis, Kamashmalan comes to teach us, Kida Rabbi Zera, that this is according to the view of Rabbi Zera. Why? The Amar Rabbi Zera, he betoch hamabui, va'akbumeta chutz lamabui. We're talking about a situation as shown in the diagram opposite note 25 on 14A3, where the bend sticks out into the Rishus Harabim. Okay? Okay, whereas the rest of the korah is clearly there in the rishus, I'll say, of the mabui, right? Right. He betoch esrim, so long as it's within 20 tfachim, va'ak mumotah lemala me esrim. Okay, what about a situation where it's within the 20, but the bend is above 20 tfachim?
Okay. Rabbi Green, our scroll is using amos instead of tvachim. Is there a machlokus about what it is, amos or tvachim?
Usually I find that if it just gives the statement, it's referring to tfachim and not amos, but if it could be, let me just look at there. Okay, I see what your point is, right. It says 20 amos of the ground, and the others above 20 amos. Usually the text actually says amos. That's why I,
Right.
okay. but
Okay.
fine. Okay. All right. So what happens? It's above 20. He lamala me'asara, if it's above 10. Va'akmumateha lamata me'asara. Okay. And its bend is below 10. Okay. And here again, but there, notice the art school uses higher than 10 tfachim,
Right.
then sags to lower than 10 tfachim. Okay, so, right. So that's why I said usually it says ro'in kol she'ilu. Okay, what do? We say that, right, ro'in kol she'ilu yinatel akmamoteha. Right? Ve'en bein zeh lezeh shlosha. Right? What we're saying there is that in any case, it's as if we could remove the bend and there wouldn't be that gap of the 3 tfachim in this straight area. We would consider it as if it's straight. Okay? Ein tzarich lahavi korah acheret. Then we don't have to bring another korah. Okay? So it's the question of what is the measure of that section that bends out, I'm going to say. If it's less than 3, we don't have a problem. If it's 3 or more, then there's a problem and I have to bring another korah. V'im lav tzrich lahavi korah acheret. Okay, and if not, right, so that's the question. Ha nami pshita, isn't this obvious? Says the Gemara. Right? Shouldn't that be the case? Right? Isn't that the situation? If it's less than 3, it should certainly be a valid. Okay, so what's so unique then? Okay. Hi betoch mabui va'ak mamoteh chutz lemabui. It's richale. Okay, so in other words, what is so unique about this example? Okay, I'm going to phrase it that way. And why did we have to teach this example? It's necessary, says the Gemara, mahu detema, because it's possible you might say, lichush, maybe we should suspect, dilma ate la'amshuche batra, okay? That maybe we might think you would be, so to speak, drawn is the exact translation, but I want to say you might carry after that section of the curvature of the bend. You might think, well, gee, since that part of the Korah actually sticks out into the Reshus Harabim a little bit further, I can carry out into that further piece and not stop where the, I'll call it the straight parts of the Korah exist. Kamash Malan comes to teach us that that's not the case, right? That the bent part is still valid, even, as I say, as it sticks out, right, in that case. Okay, next piece from our Mishnah. Agula, if it's rounded, ro'in, we view it, otaki ilu himirubat, as if it's a square, right? What does that entail us? Ha tu lamali, this also, why do we need this? Sefer itztarichale, kol sheyesh behakefo shloshat tfachim. Why? Because we need it to be able to teach the end section of our Mishnah, where it said that if so long as the circumference, okay, was 3 tfachim, yesh bo rachav tefach, okay, that it would have then at least a width of a tefach. Mina amina mina hani mili. On what basis? From where do we learn these things? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, says Rabbi Yochanan Amar Kra, based on a pasuk. Vayas et hayam motzek eser ba'ama. Right? That the pasuk there is telling us, okay, that King Solomon, when he made in the Beis HaMikdash the pool, okay, in other words, the kior that the Kohanim would use to wash from, right? Eser ba'ama misfato ba'ad sfato. Okay, that in this case, right? We say it was 10 amos from one rim to another, right? And then what happened, right? Right? Okay. So then it goes on, Atzvato Agul Saviv, that it was circular all the way around. V'chamesh ba'ama kumato, okay? And it was 5 amos high, right? V'kav shloshim ba'ama isovo tosaviv, and that the circumference encircling it was 30 amos all the way around. Vaha'ikasvato, says the Gemara. Okay, but it wasn't there a certain thickness to the circumference, like a lip, we'll call it for the moment. Amar Rav Papa, says Rav Papa, Sfato, Sfat Parak Shushan. He says, the lip or the rim, okay, was like that of a lily flower. It was a very thin, okay, like a petal. Okay. Kativ Bey. Dichtiv, why? Because it's written, Va'aviv tefach usfato kemaaseh kos perach shoshan. Okay. It's like the rim of a cup that has a lip of a lily flower. Okay.
Well, why is the rim taken into account? That does nothing to increase the circumference or the.
Well, true, but the question is, if you're measuring, are you measuring from inside the, or are you measuring including the rim?
I see.
Okay, all right. So that could be, that's one. Vaha'ika mashu, but at least there's something there, he says. Still a little bit of thickness. Ki kachashiv, migovai kachashiv. Okay, if the verse is including it, it means maybe it's included in the count, right? Including in the measure. So the Gemara comes on and tells us as follows. Okay, clarifying this item, Tanya, Rabbi Chia taught in the Braita, right? Yam she'asa Shlomo, hayam machazik me'a v'chamishim mikvah tahara. Okay, that this pool made by Solomon, okay, it could hold enough water to be able to provide 150, I guess I would say, mikvahs for the moment. Okay, so 150 times 40 seah, right, of water. Michdi, says the Gemara. Now, examining this, let's see. Mikveh kama have. How much is a mikveh? Arba'im seah. It's 40 seah, right? Right? Kedetanya, right? As it's taught elsewhere in a Braita, v'rachatz et bisaro b'mayim, right? That the Kohen wash his body in the water, right? B'mei mikvah, all right? In waters that are gathered, right? And then they darshan kol bisaro, all of his flesh must be, in other words, his entire body, right? Mayim shekol gufa ole bahen. It's water that his entire body can be encompassed in, right? So that has to be what, says the Gemara? The kamahe, right? Ama al ama, berom shalosh amot. Okay, we're talking about length, width, and depth. One ama by 1 amma, length, width, and shalosh amot, depth, right? And 3 amos deep, okay? Right, so what happens? V'shiaro chachamim me mikvah arba'im seah. And the sages then determined that that measurement of water was going to be 40 seah. Okay? Now, Gemara continues, chamesh me'ah gar midi. Okay, what are we talking about here? Are we saying 500 cubic amos? Okay, litlat me'ah, me'ah. From 300 cubic amos, we can make 100 mikvahs. Lame'ah, from 100. V'chamshin, chamishin. From another 150, right? We can make 50 mikvahs of water, right? Ba'arba'a me'ah, v'chamishin sagya. Okay? And from 450, we already get sufficient enough water based to our Braita that makes 150 mikvos. Hani mili berivua, he says, right? This is only if you say that the shape was that of a square. Yam she'asa Shlomo agul haya. But the pool, let's call it for a moment, that Solomon made was round. Michdei kama meruba yater al ha'agul. Okay, so a little geometry here. Okay, if you look again at Art Scroll tries to give you that example with a diagram. Okay, right, and this is I'm going to sort of follow Art Scroll. Okay, he says this issue: how much does the square is greater than the circle? Revia, by a quarter, right? If that's the case. La arba mea mea la mea esrim v'chamisha. Okay, so therefore the remaining 100, okay, we reduce it by a fourth, we get 25. Hani mea v'esrim v'chamisha havu lahom. Okay, so that gives you dimensions that contain only 125, right? So what happens? Gemara seems to present this contradiction. Tani Rami bar Yecheskel, Yam she'asa Shlomo, Shalosh amot tachtoniot merubaot, Ushtayim elyonot agulot. Namely, that, says Rami bar Yecheskel, if we said that the depth of the Yam was 5 amos, okay, the bottom 3 were squared off, and the upper 2 were circular. Okay? That is his attempt to clarify. And that would give you then the total, right? Vehi de'ivcha lo matzit amart. Okay? So the Gemara then says, if that's the answer, how can you clarify that? That this difference in structure, so to speak. Okay? This fato agul kativ. Why? Because the rim, we said, the lip, was described as round. Ela ema chada, he says. Okay? So why not simply say that it was just the uppermost, the one amma up on top, that was round, and the 4 down below were squared off. Lo salka da'ata. Don't even consider that, he says. Right? Dechtiv, why? Because it's written elsewhere in the pasuk, right? Apayim bat yachil. Okay? Namely, that it says it could hold 2,000 bas. Okay? Apayim bas yachil. Bas, what's a bas? Kama, how much is it? Havya? Right? Shalosh se'in. That's equal to, right, 3 se'er. Right? Bas is, again, another kind of measurement. Right? Dichtiv, why? Ma'aser habat min hakor. Right? That 1/10 of a bas comes from a core. Dahava laho shita alfei garivi. Okay, and we say that that is equal and Art Scroll points out, 2,000 bas, 6,000 measures. Okay, that's what it's suggested to be. V'haktiv, but then it's written as well, the following, right? Machazik batim shloshet alafim. Okay, that it seems then to be indicating that it could hold 3,000 bas. Hahu legudsha, says the Gemara. That was more of a heap. In other words, if you were to say that you would take a cup and, let's say, pile stuff on top, that's the heap, right? It's a heaped measure. Amar Abai. So Abai comes again to bring a better solution. Amar Abai Shmamina Hai Gudsha Tlatahava. Okay, from this Mishnah we learn, okay, that the following, that from a heap, okay, it could add up to an additional third, which nami, and we have another Mishnah that teaches as follows, right? Namely in the following examples. Shida, Teva, Umigdal. Okay, let's take an example of a carriage, or take a crate, or a closet, let's say. Right, all these items. Okay, Kiveret Hakash, or take an example of a straw basket, or Kiveret Hakenim, or a reed basket, Ubor Sfina Alexandarit, or take the example of a ship's hold, okay, the cistern of an Alexandrian ship, okay, that was another example. Afal pi sheyesh lahem shulim, even though, okay, they have bottoms, right? What happens? V'hein machzikot arba'im seah, and they can hold 40 seah belach. That's in regards to something that we talk about, that if it's a liquid measure, shehein kureyim biyavesh, which is equal to 2 kur when we're talking about dry measure, tahorim. And that's assuming that these containers are tahor, they're not susceptible to tumah. Okay? And so we finish that particular sugya. Right? Now, going to a new Mishnah, right? We talked about the details before of the Korah, right? We said the other alternative of defining the distinction of the Rishuyos is using a lechi, okay? And remember, we saw also that there were differences of opinion, okay? Rabbi Eliezer, for example, said you needed 2 lechis. Others, Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, had the machloket, right? That implied either lechi and korah, which would mean 1 lechi, or simply lechi or korah. So now we're going to clarify and deal with more details about a lechi. What does it have to be? Can we use, let's say, a simple strip of wood or something, 1 by 2? Do we need a plank? Do we need something a certain width? Okay, as we saw was the argument with the Korah. And so in this Mishnah we find as follows. L'chayim she'amru. These issues of lechi that we talked about. Gova'an esrim tfachim, says our Mishnah. Right? Their height has to be at least 10 tfachim. V'rachavan v'ovyan kol shehu. But their width and their thickness, okay, could be any amount. Rabbi Yossi omer rechavan shloshat tfachim. But Rabbi Yossi is arguing that they do have to have a minimal thickness of 3 tfachim. Okay? Now, going on, okay, to our Gemara. Lechiyin she'amru, these lechis, v'chulei, etc. Lema tnan stama k'Rabbi Eliezer. Shall we say then that this seems to be similar, that the language of this Mishnah seems to be as if we're basing it on Rabbi Eliezer. Remember, because it says lechayin, these lechis, and he was the one that required 2. Da'amar lechayin ba'inan, because doesn't he say that we require 2? Lo, no, says the Gemara. Mai lechayin. What do we mean when we say these lechis in plural? Lechayin da'alma. We're saying lechis in general, so to speak. Yachi, koranami. If that's the case, when we talked about the crossbeam, nami nitne korot, then why didn't the language in those Mishnayot also use plural? Why did it use singular? Umay korot. And what do we mean when we say cross beams in plural? Korot da'alma. We're talking about cross beams in general. Hachi kamar. This is what we mean to say, says the Gemara. Otan lechi'in shenechlaku bahen Rabbi Eliezer v'chachamim. Those cross beams which we were discussing, where there was a machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and the sages. Gova'an asarat tfachim. The height must be 10 tfachim. V'rochvan v'ovyan kol shahu. That their width and their thickness must be any amount. V'kama kol shahu. And how much is any amount? Tani Rabbi Chia. Says Rabbi Chia, afilu kechut hasarval. Even if it is the amount that's equal to a string that ties up a coat, or ties up a cloak or a garment. Okay? Now, Gemara continues. Tana, it was taught, asa lechi lechatzima boy. Okay? Let's say we have the following situation, right? Where, okay, the lechi is there, it ties for only half the court, the alleyway. Ein lo elachatzi mabui. Then he only has half the mabui. Pshita, isn't that obvious? Ela ema, but rather I would say yesh lo chatzi mabui, that if he has half the alleyway, what does it mean that he has half the alleyway? Right? In other words, he has only half the alleyway for which he's permitted to carry. Hanami pshita, isn't that obvious? Mahu detema, what do you want to say? Lichush dilma ate leishtamushi bekule. Perhaps we're going to say that we're concerned and suspect that maybe he would carry and use the whole alleyway. Kamash Malan comes to teach us, okay, that only the adjusted half, so to speak, is permitted and not the whole alleyway. Amar Rava, says Rava, asa lechi lemabui v'higbio min hakarka shlosha. Let's say, says Rava, that he made a lechi, right? He positions it at the front of the mabui, but he raised it 3 tfachim off the ground, right? O shehifligu min hakotel shlosha, or that he put this lechi a distance of 3 tfachim from the side wall of the alleyway. Lo asav v'lo klum. It's as if he didn't do anything. Afilu l'Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Even then, according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, the Amar, who says Amrinan levud, okay, who does agree on the concept of lavud, okay, even when it's wider than 3. Hanemili lamala. But maybe this only applies when we're talking about when it's above ground level. Aval lamata, but below. Kevan dahavya mechitza shagedeim bok'im ba lo ka'amar. But if we say that it's a partition that baby goats, kids can penetrate in it, he doesn't say, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, that lavud applies there. Okay, going on now. Rabbi Yossi Yomer says, Rabbi Yossi rechavan shloshat tfachim, that the width of the lechi has to be, excuse me, 3 handbreadths, right? Amar Rav Yosef, says Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Yehuda. Amar Shmuel, Menem Shmuel. Ein halacha ka Rabbi Yossi. Okay, the law is not like Rabbi Yossi, right? Lo behilme, not in terms of brine. In other words, look at, you can look at note 33 on 14b3, which clarifies that, okay? Because mixing this vegetable brine would be similar to tanning. Velo bechalechim, and not also in regards to lechis. Amarle Rav Huna bar Chinina, behilmi amart lan. Okay, so he's now saying to Rav Yosef, okay, you taught us this shiur, you taught us this lesson in regards to the brine. Belechim lo martlan, but in regards to lechis, you did not teach us this. Okay? Right. So the question is, Ma'ishna behilmi de plige rabbanan alei, v'chayin nami plige rabbanan alei? Whereas in the example of the brine, we see the rabbis disagreed with Rabbi Yossi. What about in the question of lachis? Didn't the rabbis disagree with him there too? Amar le, says to him, Shani l'chaim, mishum dekat Rabbi kevate. No, there he says the issue was different. Okay, why? Because Rabbi actually was in agreement with Rabbi Yossi. So now the Gemara tells us as follows: Rav Rechume matne hachi. Okay, and what do we see here? That Rav Mechune taught this discussion, okay, in the following manner. Okay, right, hold on 1 second. Okay, namely as follows. Amar Rav Yehuda, Berei de Rav Shmuel, Bar Shilat, Mishmei de Rav. Okay, Ein halacha ka Rabbi Yossi. He taught it this way, based on Rav Yehuda, son of Rav Shmuel, Bar Shilas, in the name of Rav. The law is not like Rabbi Yossi, lo behilme velo belachayim, neither in brine nor in regards to lechis. Amar le amart, okay, right, or amrule amart. You said this ruling in his name, okay. Amar laho, no. Amar Rava, Elohim, excuse me, taking an oath, right, by God's name. Amra ugamirna la mine. Okay. He said to him, he did say it, and we learned it from him. Umay tama kahadarbe, and what was the reason that he may have retracted it, okay, and not followed Rabbi Yossi? Mishum de Rabbi Yossi nimuko imo. Why? Because Rabbi Yossi had valid reasons behind his statement. He could provide valid explanations, sound legal reasoning. Amarle, he said to him, Rava bar Rav Chanan la'abaye, hilchata mai. So what then is the law? Amarle, he said to him, Puk chazi mai amadabar. Go out and see what the people do. However, this statement of go out and see what the nation was doing, how the people behave, others say was taught on the following issue. Hashoter mayim litzam'o, one who drinks water as a result of his thirst, right, says what bracha? Omer shahakol niheh bidvaro, should say the blessing through whose word everything exists. Rabbi Tarfon Omer, Borei nefashot rabot v'chesronan. Rabbi Tarfon disagreed and says it's the blessing who creates numerous living beings with all their deficiencies for all that you've created, etc. Al kol masha barata. Amar le Rav Chanan le'Abai, Hilchat Hamai, coming back then, what is the law? Amar le pukchazi mayam dabar. Go look and see what the people do. Okay, see what the people do, if that's what's the expected practice. In our case, what do they do? In that example, they say one blessing before, right? And they say a different blessing from Rabbi Tarfon afterwards. Now, I'm just going to go a tiny bit on the top of Ted Vav. Okay? Itmar, lechi ha'omed me'alav. Okay? Again, we're talking about another kind of situation of a lechi. Abai Amar have lechi. Abai says, this lechi, okay, that was put there, but it wasn't put there with the intended purpose to serve as an adjustment for the alleyway. Okay? So its initial intent necessarily wasn't there as a lechi. Do we still consider it a valid lechi? Amar, Abai Amar, have lechi. Abai says it is a lechi. Rava Amar lo havi lechi. And Rava says it's not a valid lechi. So the Gemara wants to then go into a discussion. In a situation where people didn't rely on it from the day before as a lechi, kuli alma lo plige de lo have lechi. Nobody disagrees, or everyone does agree that it's not a valid lechi. Ki pligi, where do they disagree? Where the people do rely on it and use it as a valid lechi from previously, from the day before, from before the start of Shabbat. Abai Amar have lechi. Abai say it's a valid lechi. Why? The hasam chinan alei me'etmol, because people do rely on it from the day before, from Shabbat. Rava Amar lo havi lechi. And Rava says it's not a valid lechi, kevan de me'ikara lav ada'ate dahachi avide. Why? Because that was not its original purpose. It wasn't directed with that intent. Lo havi lechi. And it's therefore not considered a valid lechi. Okay, and that's where we're going to stop right now. So we'll pick up and see what happens then in this argument between Abaye and Rava, and what is the status of that lechi. Okay. All right, everybody, have a good day. Take care. Stay well.
You too, Rabbi. Thank you very much, and may all your lechis be straight. Have a wonderful day.
Take care.
Thank you, Rabbi.